The dormitory's silence is unholy. No bells. No brothers shuffling. No rogue chickens clucking. Just the soft tick-tick-tick of the mechanical clock in the tower, its pendulum swaying like a monk in meditation. Dawn seeps through the shutters, but no one startles awake. The clock's gentle dong has already herded the monastery into prayer with the efficiency of a celestial sheepdog. Human alarm monks, once vital as air, now wander the cloister like ghosts of obsolescence. Brother Arnulf, formerly the abbey's most feared dawn-shouter, has taken up knitting. Mechanical clocks didn't just change time, they murdered a job market. By the 14th century, monasteries across Europe retired their knockers, shouters, and water clock pea-warmers. Mainstream fact: St. Albans Abbey's clock, built in 1320, could chime 24/7 without a single brother losing his voice. Quirky tidbit. Some ex-alarm monks became clock whisperers, hired to soothe townsfolk terrified of the new machines. Fear not, good sir, it won't bite. Probably. Historians still argue whether this shift improved monastic life or just swapped one tyranny for another. After all, you can't negotiate with a gear. You trace a finger over the clock's iron face, cold as a reliquary. The abbey's rhythm is smoother now, yes, but where's the drama? The frozen pipe fiascos? The candle-induced panic? Even the mice seem bored, no longer dodging sprinting brothers. The abbot claims this is progress, but you've seen him wistfully eyeing the old water clock bucket. Outside, the world's catching up. Village churches install clocks, their bells synced to the monasteries. Farmers plant by the hour, not the sun. Time, once a fluid thing, hardens into grid lines. Yet in the scriptorium, a scribe doodles a monk battling a clockwork dragon, a quiet protest against the new order. As you drift off during none, a habit that even gears can't break, the tick-tick-tick seeps into your dreams. No more water spills. No candle wax puddles. Just a relentless, perfect rhythm, ticking down to the end of an era. The monastery settles into a hush deeper than prayer. Moonlight pools in the cloister garden, silvering herbs once burned to mark the hours. The clock tower's shadow stretches long and thin, its gears resting between chimes. You linger at the dormitory window, watching breath fog the glass, a transient clock face, here then gone. Centuries unravel like parchment. That frantic knocker, sprinting icy halls, the scribe's ink-stained yawns. Adelard's workshop clatter, all softened now, smoothed into stories the stones murmur on windless nights. Time, once a foe to outwit, becomes a river you float upon, its currents gentle, inevitable. Somewhere, a smartphone dims. A watch glows. A child asks why clocks exist, and a parent hums, half remembering monks and stars. The tick-tick-tick follows you into the dark, no longer a demand, but a lullaby, proof that even time, in the end, rests. You exhale. The world holds its breath. And in the space between heartbeats, there's only this: quiet, endless, and kind. Sweet dreams. The Rock, as it turns out, isn't the only unimpressed audience member. You follow Pan's hooves uphill, where the air thins and the grass grows stubbornly patchy, a landscape only a shepherd could love. Here, under a sun that's less golden hour glow and more relentless interrogation lamp, a dozen shepherds slump against their staffs. Their sheep graze in slow motion, chewing cud with the enthusiasm of bureaucrats stamping paperwork. This isn't pastoral poetry. This is boredom, the ancient Greek edition. One shepherd, a guy named Lycon with eyebrows thicker than Athena's strategic playbook, yawns so wide you can see his missing molar. His yawn ripples through the group like a yawn in a modern office meeting. Contagious, inevitable, crushing. Pan watches, equal parts horrified and fascinated. His lullabies fail to charm nymphs, but here, among mortals whose idea of excitement is a slightly less lazy sheep, he senses opportunity. Mainstream fact interlude: ancient Greek shepherds were the original influencers of monotony. Their job? Stare at sheep. Their hobbies? Stare at sheep harder. They counted flocks, named clouds, and occasionally shouted at wolves who'd long since retired. Historians note they often chewed time leaves to stay awake, a practice that explains why so many later became amateur philosophers. Time plus sleep deprivation equals, what if the real sheep are the friends we made along the way? Pan, ever the problem solver, snaps a reed from a nearby marsh. Not for music, mind you, to poke Lycaon's arm. The shepherd jerks awake, muttering something unprintable even in ancient Attic. But Pan's already blowing into the hollow stalk, producing a sound somewhere between a sick owl and a deflating wineskin. The sheep lift their heads. The shepherds lift their eyebrows. And you're stuck here, listening to the birth of the world's first ASMR track. Quirky tidbit alert, that first flute was less instrument and more accidental kazoo. Pan's initial attempts involved blowing across reeds while yawning, creating a drowsy vibrato that made even the sheep's eyelids droop. By sundown, the shepherds were using his reed toots to time their naps. 3 flat notes meant, "Wake me if a wolf comes." 5 sharp ones meant, "Wake me if Dionysus throws a rave in the valley." Scholars still argue whether Pan invented the flute or just ripped off a Mesopotamian nose flute design he overheard Hermes mention. The debate rages in academic journals and taverns alike, but let's be real. Does it matter? The shepherds weren't nitpicking provenance. They just wanted something to drown out the existential dread of counting sheep as a career. You crouch beside Lycaon as Pan refines his prototype, shaving the reed with a thumbnail chewed to the quick. The next melody is softer, slower. A tune that doesn't so much play as ooze, like honey sliding off a drowsy spoon. The shepherds slump further, staffs slipping from their hands. One starts snoring in rhythm. Pan grins, his goatish teeth gleaming. For the first time, he's not being heckled, he's being ignored. And in the economy of divine validation, indifference beats tomatoes to the face. But here's the twist, those yawns that inspired Pan? They weren't just boredom. Ancient Greek shepherds believed exhaling deeply warded off evil spirits, basically, the Bronze Age version of smudging sage. So every time Lycaon yawned, he thought he was doing community service. Pan, oblivious, just heard a percussion section. By moonrise, the hillside looks like a slumber party for the chronically overworked. Sheep snooze upright. Shepherds drool into their cloaks. And Pan. He's sprawled on a rock, reed flute clutched to his chest, finally at peace. His music won no awards, sparked no revolutions. But in a world where even the gods demanded perfection, he'd stumbled into something radical, mediocrity as a sacrament. You stand to leave, but your sandal scuffs a pebble. Pan's ear twitches, a reminder that those goatish senses miss nothing. He doesn't open his eyes. Just mumbles, "Tell Apollo his lyre solos give me hives," before rolling over. The flute slips from his grip, landing in the grass with a thwip softer than a moth's apology. The sun's glare sharpens as a golden chariot thunders onto the scene, wheels sparking off rocks like a caffeinated fireworks show. You shield your eyes, not from the light, but from the sheer audacity of Apollo's entrance. The god of music leaps down, lyre in hand, his hair a perfect cascade of arrogance. He takes one look at Pan's reed flute, snorts, and mutters, "Cute. My dog makes better art with his chew toys." Mainstream fact time, Apollo's lyre wasn't just an instrument, it was ancient Greece's original flex. Crafted by Hermes, yes, Pan's absentee dad, from a tortoise shell and cow guts, its strings allegedly plucked the very harmonics of the cosmos. Apollo's fans included emperors, muses, and that one guy who thought listening to lyre solos counted as a personality. But Pan's fanbase was sheep, and even they were lukewarm. Apollo's challenge is swift and dripping with condescension, a musical duel. Winner gets bragging rights, loser gets immortalized as a cautionary tale. The judges? 3 nymphs, a satyr with a wine-induced nap schedule, and Zeus himself, who's only here because Hera threatened to cancel his Thunderbolt subscription. You crouch behind a boulder as Apollo tunes his lyre with the precision of a brain surgeon. His first note rings out, crystalline, flawless, annoyingly perfect. Birds swoon mid-flight. Flowers bloom in time signature. Even the mud on your sandal starts feeling unworthy. Apollo smirks, launching into a composition titled Ode to My Own Magnificence, with optional choral weeping. Quirky twist, that lyre? Its strings were rumored to be spun from spider silk dipped in moonlight. Apollo claimed it gave him a richer tonal palette, but really, it just made tuning a nightmare. Every time a cloud passed, the instrument went flat, forcing him to shout at the sky like a disgruntled gym teacher. Pan, meanwhile, fashions a new flute from a reed he'd soaked in sheep drool. For texture, he insists. His opening note squeaks like a stepped-on mouse. Apollo rolls his eyes so hard, you half expect them to stick that way. But Pan keeps blowing, leaning into the dissonance, weaving a melody that's less song and more auditory hammock. The rhythm? Irregular. The pitch? Questionable. The vibe? Strangely soothing. Halfway through Apollo's third movement, a very ambitious allegro about his biceps, you notice the judge's eyelids fluttering. The satyr's head lolls. A nymph muffles a yawn into her sleeve. Zeus starts scribbling grocery lists on a thundercloud. Pan's flute, meanwhile, loops the same 4 notes, a lullaby for gods who've heard it all before. Scholars still argue whether Apollo lost because his music was too perfect. Some claim the nymphs, accustomed to nature's messy symphonies, found his precision unnerving, like eating a meal where every grape is identical. Others insist Zeus dozed off mid-contest and picked Pan randomly. But here's the kicker. One fragmented scroll suggests Apollo let Pan win to dodge future duels with amateur hour performers. By the final note, the satyr's snoring syncs with Pan's off-key trills. Apollo's smirk wilts. This isn't art, he snaps, gesturing to Pan's drool-streaked flute. This is background noise for mortals folding togas. Pan shrugs. Cool. You keep your art. I'll take the nap. Zeus, now halfway through a cloud-written recipe for ambrosia smoothies, declares Pan the winner. Apollo storms off, his chariot screeching through the sky like a disgraced Uber driver. The nymphs, still groggy, award Pan a wreath of wilted parsley, the ancient equivalent of a participation trophy. You linger as Pan tosses the wreath to a sheep. Art's overrated, he tells it. Sleep's eternal. The sheep burps in agreement. The forest is pissed. Not lightly miffed or passive-aggressively rustling leaves, but full-on, root-quaking, acorn-pelting fury. You duck as a pinecone whizzes past your ear, launched by a dryad whose expression suggests she's one lullaby away from committing deicide. The nymphs have unionized. And their demands. Refunds. Therapy. A divine restraining order against Pan's flute. Mainstream fact interlude. Nymphs weren't just pretty faces in togas. Dryads were their trees. Scratch a bark, and they'd bleed sap. Naiads kept rivers flowing, mess with their streams, and suddenly your village has a drought and a suspicious number of drownings. So when Pan's flute music seeped into their ecosystems, it wasn't just annoying. It was an existential threat. You sidestep a naiad hurling river stones at Pan's cave, she misses, hitting a startled badger instead. The god himself is crouched behind a boulder, clutching his flute like a kid caught drawing on temple walls. It's not my fault they're light sleepers, he hisses to you, as if you're his co-conspirator. The quirky twist. The nymphs' protest signs. Ancient Greek boycotts were creative. A dryad waves a branch scrawled with my oak snores now, thanks Pan in charcoal. A naiad sign reads water doesn't flow if we're in a coma, illustrated with a stick figure waterfall snoozing on a rock. Pan's fanbase, 3 shepherds and a particularly drowsy crow, attempt to counter-protest with a banner reading melodies, melodrama. It does not go well. Scholars still argue whether the nymph's rage was genuine or performative. One papyrus fragment claims dryads secretly loved Pan's music because it let them nap guilt-free, finally, an excuse to ignore photosynthesis. Others insist the boycott was a ploy to get Dionysus to throw them a better party. Either way, the backlash went viral. In the ancient sense, a satyr scribbled it onto a tavern wall, and suddenly everyone had an opinion. You trail Pan as he attempts damage control, offering a free lullaby to any nymph who stops pelting him. The dryads respond by shaking their branches in unison, a woody clatter that sounds suspiciously like hell no. A naiad lobs a waterlogged lyre at his head, Apollo's old demo tape, presumably. Pan's solution? Play louder. Big mistake. The flute's drone rolls through the forest like fog, thick, suffocating, inescapable. Mid-scream, a dryad's eyelids droop. Her protest sign slips from her grip, landing in a patch of drowsy daisies. The naiad's next insult comes out as a yawn. Even the wind slows, as if the air itself is considering a quick nap. Pan, emboldened, hops onto a mossy stump and plays a melody so monotonous, it makes the concept of time feel redundant. Here's the kicker. Nymphs, being nature spirits, were terrible at resisting natural sounds. A babbling brook? They'd zone out for hours. Bird calls? Instant trance. Pan's flute, with its reedy imitation of wind through cracks? Basically NyQuil with a beat. One by one, the protesters slump. A dryad snores into her oak's trunk. A naiad floats belly up downstream, murmuring about negotiating in good faith, after a quick zzz. But Pan's victory is short-lived. The real victim here? The forest. Without nymphs awake to tend it, flowers wilt into grumpy spirals. Rivers develop a lazy, meandering gait. A sacred olive tree starts shedding leaves like a balding philosopher. Pan, oblivious, celebrates by composing a new track, Ode to the Sound of No One Yelling at Me. You're about to sneak away when a drowsy dryad grabs your wrist. Tell him, she mumbles. Next time, we'll bring bees, before passing out cold. Pan pauses mid-toot. Bees. He scratches his beard. Could add a nice buzz to the next album. The crow facepalms. The satyrs are winning at losing control. You smell them before you see them, a pungent cocktail of fermented grapes, unwashed goat fur, and poor life choices. Dionysus's entourage has turned a sacred grove into a frat house, complete with vine swings, amphora keg stands, and a game of pin the tail on the sober guy. A satyr named Marin hurtles past you, belching the alphabet. Another, Stelios, tries to juggle figs but mostly just hits himself in the face. It's chaos. It's chaos with hooves. Mainstream fact time. Satyrs were the ancient world's ultimate party starters. Half man, half goat, all ID, they followed Dionysus like groupies, turning every forest into a rave and every rave into a misdemeanor. But their antics had limits. Get them too rowdy, and they'd start flipping ox carts or giving unsolicited poetry readings. Pan, tasked with crowd control, faces a dilemma. How do you calm creatures fueled by wine and bad decisions? His answer: weaponize boredom. Pan whittles a new flute, this time from a willow branch soaked in chamomile tea, for chill vibes, he explains. The first note he plays is less a musical pitch and more an auditory sedative. It's the sound of a clock ticking in an empty waiting room. The sound of a lecture on Roman tax law. The sound of me droning on about Roman tax law. Quirky twist: satyrs, despite their reputation, had a secret weakness: repetition. Dionysus once put one in a loop dancing the same jig for hours, and the poor guy didn't notice until he sobered up 3 days later. Pan's flute exploits this glitch in their party-hard wiring. His melody loops the same 4 notes, each as identical as Zeus's excuses for cheating on Hera. At first, the satyrs don't notice. Marin mid-belch freezes like a buffering statue. Stelios drops his figs a third satyr, mid-leap onto a wine barrel, hangs in the air just a little too long, defying physics and dignity. Then, slowly, their pupils dilate. Their hooves tap, but not to the beat. To the absence of beat. Scholars still argue whether Pan's music hypnotized the satyrs or just annoyed them into submission. A fresco in Pompeii shows a satyr covering his ears while fleeing a flute, but art historians can't agree if it's Pan or a really bad busker. Meanwhile, Dionysian cult texts cryptically warn against the trance of too many thirds, whatever that means. You weave through the grove as the chaos unravels. A satyr who'd been chugging wine from a helmet pauses, stares into the abyss, or maybe his own reflection, and mutters, "What's the point?" Another starts braiding his beard, humming tunelessly. Marin, once the life of the party, sits cross-legged, stacking pebbles with the focus of a monk transcribing scripture. Pan, perched on a mossy log, grins. Told you they just needed a nap. But here's the problem: it works too well. The satyrs aren't just calm, they're catatonic. One starts reciting agricultural tax codes from memory. Another writes a heartfelt letter to his ex-nymph girlfriend, apologizing for that time he turned her pond into a jacuzzi. Dionysus himself stumbles into the grove, grapevines askew, and halts. What did you do to my boys? Pan shrugs. Unruffled your satyrs. You're welcome. Dionysus surveys the scene, a satyr folding origami swans, another sketching clouds, a third meditating. The wine god's eye twitches. This isn't unruffled. This is domesticated. Historians still debate whether Dionysus secretly loved the change. After all, hungover satyrs were cheaper to feed. But publicly, he banned Pan's flute from all future parties, calling it a threat to the Dionysian brand. The satyrs, for their part, formed a book club. It lasted 2 meetings before someone ate the scrolls. As you slip away, Pan plays a victory tune, same 4 notes, slower. Dionysus sinks onto a stump, head in hands. Next, he groans, you'll have them voting in elections. A satyr nearby looks up from his pebble pyramid. Democracy does sound kinda nice. No. Olympus after dark isn't the glittering utopia you'd expect. Sure, the palace gleams like a disco ball plated in stardust, but Zeus's bedroom? Think less divine sanctuary, and more toddler's tantrum zone after too much ambrosia. Hera's voice ricochets off the marble walls, each rant sharp enough to slice through a titan's ego. You turned yourself into a swan again, she thunders, pacing so hard her peacock feather robe sheds iridescent rage. Zeus, sprawled on a cloud mattress, stares at the ceiling like it holds the secrets to witness protection. Mainstream fact interlude, Zeus's insomnia was legendary. Scrolls describe his midnight escapades, morphing into animals, starting wars, binge-eating lightning bolts, all to avoid Hera's wrath. But even gods have limits. By the 3rd millennium of marriage, his tricks were less epic metamorphosis, and more hiding in Apollo's lyre case. Enter Pan's flute. Zeus first hears it during a mortal incognito trip, read, midlife crisis. Disguised as a shepherd, he stumbles upon a hillside of snoring humans, their sheep cuddled into fluffy pillows. Pan's melody drifts over them, a sonic quilt muffling the world's edges. Zeus's godly ADHD melts like wax. For the first time in eons, his brain isn't a chorus of war plans and paternity lawsuits. It's quiet. Quirky twist, the king of gods becomes history's first music pirate. Using a conch shell rigged with Hermes's sandal straps, don't ask, Zeus records Pan's flute and beams it to Olympus via rainbow refraction. The result? A divine white noise machine. Hera's rants about his swan phase dissolve into muffled static, drowned out by reed-induced serenity. Scholars still argue whether Zeus genuinely enjoyed Pan's music or just hated Hera's voice more. A fragmentary hymn found in Crete claims Zeus called it the sound of not being yelled at, while a Spartan drinking song insists he played it during godly council meetings to make Ares fall asleep mid-war proposal. Either way, Olympus's nightlife shifted. Nymphs posted guard duty outside Zeus's chamber reported hearing strange loops of flute core, and the occasional snort laugh as Hera, unaware, raged into the void. You're crouched behind a pillar as Zeus, now a full-blown Pan fanboy, adjusts his makeshift speaker system, a constellation arranged to vibrate at specific frequencies. Hera storms past, oblivious, her tiara crackling with unspent lightning. I know you're scheming, Zeus. I can feel it in my peacocks. The king waits until her footsteps fade, then hits play. Pan's flute oozes through the halls, slower than a snail on melatonin. Zeus sighs, sinking into his cloud. Should have done this after the first swan incident, he mumbles, yawning. But here's the kicker, Hera isn't fooled. One night, she follows the sound to its source, expecting an affair. Instead, she finds Zeus drooling on his throne, Pan's music looping as a holographic sheep counts itself overhead. Her anger falters. The melody, annoyingly, works on her too. Historians still debate what happened next. Some say she smashed the conch shell. Others claim she downloaded the track for girls' nights with Athena. The only consensus? Olympus's dawn chorus that morning included a new sound, twin godly snoses harmonizing in F-sharp minor. As you tiptoe out, Zeus stirs. "Tell Pan," he murmurs, eyes closed. "If he wants a favor, make a 10-hour version." A thunderbolt ripples in agreement. You're knee-deep in a Phrygian courtroom that reeks of desperation and rose-scented oil. King Midas slouches on his throne, his crown askew, his fingers twitching like he's still craving that golden touch. But tonight's problem isn't his hands, it's his ears. Two fuzzy, twitching, decidedly donkey-ish ears sprout beneath his turban, each large enough to pick up gossip from the next kingdom over. The courtiers pretend not to notice. The servants really pretend not to notice. You're trying not to laugh. Mainstream fact time: Midas's golden touch was a flop. Turning your bagel into a paperweight gets old fast, but his donkey ears? That was Apollo's petty revenge for the king daring to prefer Pan's flute music over his lyre solos. The lesson: never critique a god's mixtape. Midas waves you closer, his turban slipping to reveal an ear's velvety tip. "Shoo," he whispers, though the room's already silent. "It's starting." A servant rolls in a bronze gong, strikes it, BWONG, and the king winces. "Too loud. Pan's melody, you imbeciles." Quirky twist: those donkey ears? They're sensitive. Apollo's perfectly tuned lyre notes feel like ice picks to Midas's eardrums, while Pan's off-key flute loops. Oral melatonin. The king's court musicians, desperate to keep their heads, literally, now play exclusively in muffled, drowsy tones. Even the court poet has swapped epics for yawn-filled haikus. Scholars still argue whether Midas's ears were literal or metaphorical, a dig at his asinine taste in music. One papyrus fragment claims he hosted a toga party where guests wore donkey ear headbands, ironically, but most historians agree, the king just really loved bad flute covers. Pan's music wafts in, carried by a breeze that's clearly done this before. Midas melts into his throne, ears drooping like overwatered lettuce. "Finally," he sighs. "No more of Apollo's precious arpeggios." A court musician, half asleep mid-lullaby, nods off and plucks a lyre string with his forehead. Twang. The king doesn't stir. Here's the kicker: Midas's ears became a stealth fashion trend. Phrygian nobles started wrapping their heads in embroidered turbans, claiming it was the new Persian chic. Secretly, they were hiding their own Apollo-induced ear mutations from bad karaoke nights. A fresco in Anatolia shows a party where everyone's turban has suspicious ear-shaped lumps, ancient cancel culture at its finest. You lean against a column as Pan's flute crescendos, a term used loosely here. Midas's snores sync with the rhythm, his ears flopping like palm fronds in a breeze. A servant tiptoes in, adjusts the king's turban, and mouths, "They're getting bigger," to a colleague. The colleague responds with a shrug that says, "Not my problem, I get paid in figs." But let's address the elephant, or donkey, in the room. Why didn't Midas just ask Pan to fix his ears? Rumor says he tried. Pan, mid-nap, mumbled, "Why?" "They're an upgrade," and offered to compose a song for the ears. It's titled Ode to the Sound of Your Own Internal Screams, Lullaby Remix. As you slip out, a courtier stops you. "Pust. Want a turban?" He whips out a linen monstrosity with donkey ear padding. Waterproof. Breathable. Blocks out 100% of divine solos. You decline. He shrugs. Your loss. Apollo's dropping a new single next week. Midas's snore echoes down the hall, a raspy duet with Pan's flute. Somewhere, Apollo's grinding his teeth into stardust. The Spartan barracks smell of sweat, iron, and regret. You're crouched behind a shield propped against a wall, not hiding, just practicing the local art of not getting noticed by people who bench press boulders for fun. Moonlight slices through the open windows, illuminating rows of snoring warriors. But these aren't ordinary snores. They're tactical, rhythmic, drilled. Mainstream fact interlude: Spartans didn't just train their bodies, they weaponized sleep. While other Greeks counted sheep, Spartans counted spear thrusts. Their infamous agoge program included battle naps, short, deep rests taken mid-march, mid-drill, or mid-lecture on the virtues of eating black broth without gagging. Historians note they could fall asleep faster than Athena could turn someone into a spider. Tonight, though, something's different. A lone flute trills in the distance, its melody as sparse as a Spartan's smile. You recognize the tune, Pan's Ode to the Sound of Your Own Internal Screams, Lullaby Remix. But here, in the land of, if you flinch during flogging, you're dessert, it's been repurposed. Quirky twist, Spartans hated music. Lyres. Too delicate. Drums. Too fun. But Pan's flute? It was the acoustic equivalent of a cold bath, jarring enough to keep them alert, monotonous enough to lull their souls into submission. A win-win. They called it the enemy of joy, but a friend of strategic REM cycles. A young warrior named Leonidas, no, not that one, snaps awake mid-snore, javelin in hand. His comrade, Dionyx, grunts without opening his eyes. Relax. It's just the pre-march drill. Leonidas blinks, lowers his weapon, and starts doing push-ups. In his sleep. You're equal parts impressed and concerned. Pan's flute grows louder, carried by a breeze that's clearly lost its way. The melody syncs with the warrior's breathing. Inhale for 4 notes, exhale for 4 more. A helot, Spartan slave, tiptoes through the barracks, adjusting wool blankets with the precision of a bomb diffuser. One warrior murmurs, 5 more minutes, mother, and Dionyx kicks him awake. Never mention your mother in here. Scholars still argue whether Spartans truly used music or just tolerated it as a necessary evil. A crushed amphora found near Thermopylae bears the inscription Pan sucks, but the S is scratched out, replaced with Aves our sanity. Classic Spartan mixed review. You follow the helot outside, where a moonlit field hosts the weirdest drill you've ever seen. Rows of warriors lie on their backs, shields as pillows, eyes shut. A drill sergeant paces, barking, nap formation. 2-hour march in your dreams. Go. Pan's flute loops lazily as the men snore in unison. One warrior sleep sharpens his spear. Another mumbles, battle coordinates. Here's the kicker. Spartans believed dreams were tactical briefings from Ares himself. If you couldn't nap under enemy bombardment, how could you decode divine intel? Pan's flute became their lullaby grenade, exploding serenity into the chaos. Dionyx collapses beside you, eyes closed, still somehow aware of your presence. You, foreigner. Why are you awake? Researching. He snorts. Weak. Real Spartans sleep and critique your life choices simultaneously. A pause. That flute's not terrible. Like a cat coughing rhythmically. High praise. But even Pan's music meets its match when a warrior named Aristodemus starts sleep-shouting insults. Your mother's so ugly, she turned Medusa to stone. The sergeant sighs. Aristodemus. Silence. Or I'll make you nap naked in a snowbank. Joke's on you, I've done that. The flute falters mid-note. Pan, hidden in a nearby olive grove, mutters, tougher crowd than the satyrs. As dawn bleeds into the sky, the warriors rise, refreshed, ruthless, and ready to march 30th miles before breakfast. The helot collapses, exhausted from pretending this is normal. Pan packs his flute, shaking his head. Next time, I'm adding a lyre. See how they like that. Dionyx, already 5 miles ahead, shouts over his shoulder, lyres are for Athenian poets who cry at sunsets. Fair point. Delphi in August is less mystical vortex of wisdom, and more overpriced spiritual flea market. You elbow through crowds of pilgrims clutching sacrificial goats, their sandals sticky with honey offerings and existential dread. The air reeks of burnt laurel leaves and desperation. At the temple's mouth, the Pythia, oracle extraordinaire, slouches on her tripod, chewing a fig with the enthusiasm of a DMV clerk. Her latest prophecy? Pan's music is divinely mediocre. The crowd gasps. A philosopher faints. A goat eats his scroll. Mainstream fact time. The Delphic oracle never gave straight answers. Ask, should I invade Persia? And she'd say something like, a rolling stone gathers no satyrs. But, divinely mediocre? That's the ancient equivalent of a Yelp review from hell. Pilgrims split into factions. Team mediocre means blessed, and Team mediocre means we should burn Pan's flute. The debate rages hotter than Hades's LinkedIn profile. You squeeze past a priest hawking, divinely mediocre, embroidered tunics, 50 drachmas, free fig with purchase, and catch the Pythia mid-eye roll. Look, she hisses to an acolyte. I just say what the fumes tell me. Blame the geological cracks, not me. The sacred vapors, a mix of ethylene and wishful thinking, waft up from the floor. She inhales deeply, twitches and adds, also, tell Pan to tune his stupid reed. Quirky twist, the phrase, divinely mediocre, goes viral. Graffiti in Athens tags it beside Apollo's temple. A playwright pens the mediocrity of Pan, a tragedy in 3 yawns. Even Sparta's king sends a memo. If mediocre means, can nap through invasion, we're in. Scholars still argue whether the oracle was shading Pan or saving his career. One papyrus claims she'd bet Dionysus 5 amphorae of wine that mediocre would trend. Another suggests the real prophecy was divinely metallurgical, mistranslated by a scribe who'd been up for 72 hours transcribing tax codes. You find Pan lurking behind a myrtle tree, eavesdropping on pilgrims debating his artistic worth. Divinely mediocre, he mutters. Could have been worse. She once called Apollo's lyre the auditory equivalent of a participation trophy. A pilgrim spots him and shrieks. It's him, the mediocre one. Pan bolts, hooves clattering on marble, as the mob gives chase, half to worship him, half to chuck olives. He ducks into the temple's basement, where the Pythia's backup tripod collects dust. You, he pants. Was that prophecy a compliment or a curse? The oracle shrugs. Yes. Historians still debate whether this exchange sparked Pan's existential crisis or just his allergy to incense. What's clear? The mediocre brand stuck. Farmers prayed to Pan for adequately moist soil. Brides begged him for marriages that are fine, I guess. His cult's new motto, meh, whatever. We're here for the naps. As you exit, a street vendor shoves a clay flute into your hands. Authentic Pan replica. Makes your sheep 12% drowsier. You blow into it. The sound. Like a deflating balloon serenading a coma. The vendor nods. Divinely mediocre, right? Somewhere, Apollo weeps into his lyre. Rome's elite aren't having fun, they're performing it. You're wedged between a sweating senator and a marble column carved with enough cherubs to make Cupid gag. The villa's atrium buzzes with forced laughter, politically strategic flirting, and the clink of goblets drained faster than dignity. A slave whispers, Faunus is here, and the crowd parts like the Red Sea if Moses were a tipsy woodland god with a PR team. Mainstream fact interlude, Faunus, Rome's answer to Pan, was less goat-legged menace and more well-groomed influencer of pastoral vibes. While Pan terrorized nymphs, Faunus hosted wine and cheese nights for minor deities. His genius? Rebooting Pan's flute music as ambient soundscapes for discerning hedonists. The sales pitch. Orgies, but make them nap-friendly. Quirky twist, the Roman elite loved excess, but even they needed downtime between debauchery. Faunus's solution? Insert Pan's flute tracks between lyre solos and grape-stomping sessions. The result. Parties where guests could transition seamlessly from drunken revelry to drunken nap without losing social clout. A senator snores into his date's shoulder. She applauds his commitment to holistic leisure. Faunus takes center stage, his flute, gold-plated, because Rome, raised like a scepter. Friends, countrymen, lend me your ears, but not too attentively. He plays a melody so smooth, it makes olive oil seem gritty. The tempo. Andante ma non troppo, walking, but lazily. The vibe. A sonic massage for souls taxed by empire building. Scholars still argue whether Faunus truly respected Pan's music or just slapped a Latin label on it to seem edgy. A mosaic in Pompeii shows Faunus winking at a satyr while holding a scroll titled How to Sell Greek Junk as Roman Genius. Meanwhile, Stoic philosophers wrote entire treatises on whether background music for mild orgies corrupted virtue or just made vice more efficient. You sidestep a dozing centurion, snoring in perfect formation, and reach Faunus as he schmoozes a consul's wife. The secret, he purrs, is to play during the revelry, not after. That way, when they collapse, it feels intentional. She nods, eyes glazed. From the music or the 3 goblets of Falernian wine, who's to say? Here's the kicker, Rome's mild orgies became the ultimate flex. Hosts competed to have the most boring soundtrack, boasting about imported Arcadian dreariness and authentic shepherd yawns. A surviving invitation reads, "Come to Lucius's villa. Dionysus free zone. Nap cushions provided." Attendance was meh, according to slave diaries. The party peaks, or plateaus, when a Vestal virgin wanders in, mistaking the villa for a temple. Faunus, ever the opportunist, serenades her with Pan's Ode to Chastity, unverified remix. She leaves a 5-star Yelp review on a wax tablet. Finally, a gathering where no one tries to seduce me. A plus would meditate again. But Faunus's triumph sours at dawn. A hungover patrician staggers over, clutching his head. Your music's too effective. I slept through 7 bribes and a divorce announcement. Faunus shrugs. Blame Pan. I just monetized his mediocrity. As you exit, a street vendor shoves a flute into your hands. Faunus approved. Guaranteed to make your orgies 70% less fun and 100% more Senate approved. You decline. He leans in. Pissed. Got a Pan original in the back. But don't tell Jupiter. Somewhere beyond the Tiber, Pan facehoofs. The monastery's scriptorium smells of ink, piety, and regret. You're hunched over a parchment so old, it crackles like a witch's breakfast cereal. Brother Theodoric, your chaperone, squints at a line of Latin and mutters, Somnus est hostis Dei. Sleep is the enemy of God. He says this while swaying on his feet, eyes red-rimmed from copying psalms in triplicate. The other monks droop at their desks, quills scratching a desperate lullaby of devotion. Mainstream fact time. Medieval monks fought sleep like it was the 8th deadly sin. They'd chant, self-flagellate, and dunk their heads in icy fonts, all to stay awake for midnight prayers. Gregorian chants? Originally designed as anti-lullabies, all sharp tones and jarring harmonies to keep the mind alert. But then someone found Pan's flute music in a mislabeled manuscript. Quirky twist, the Abbey of St. Drogo, patron saint of coffee substitutes, accidentally ordered a crate of Greek hymnals from a Venetian merchant. Instead of psalms, they got Pan's sheet music, transcribed by a tone-deaf scribe who wrote ad demons dormiendos, to sleep demons, in the margins. The monks, ever literal, took it as divine instruction. Scholars still argue whether the resulting chants were a mistranslation or a divine prank. One illuminated manuscript shows a demon snoring in a monk's lap while the choir sings Pan's lazy Lydian mode. Another depicts Saint Drogo himself face-palming from heaven. You trail Brother Theodoric to Vespers, where the choir launches into a very suspicious melody. The abbot insists it's a newly discovered hymn to Saint Blandina, patroness of tedious tasks, but you recognize the tune, Pan's Ode to the Sound of No One Yelling at Me, monastic remix. The monks drone in unison, their voices blending into a sonic fog. Within minutes, half the choir is asleep on their feet. The abbot, mistaking this for rapture, whispers, "Behold, the holy drowsiness." Here's the kicker, the monks' demonic drowsiness chants became a hit. Pilgrims flocked to St. Drogo's, not for miracles, but for the best naps of their lives. A duke's wife reportedly snored so loud during Mass, she woke up canonized as Saint Roncha. The abbey's revenue tripled, until the Vatican caught wind and sent an investigator. You're copying manuscripts, poorly, when the Inquisitor arrives. Brother Theodoric panics, shoving Pan's sheet music into a heretical jams drawer. The Inquisitor, A man whose face screams, "I've seen too much," demands to hear the chants. The choir obliges. By the third verse, the inquisitor's eyelids flutter. By the fifth, he's snoring into his own beard. The abbot beams. A sign from God. Theodoric leans over. More like a sign from Pan. But hey, vox Dei, vox Capri. Voice of God, voice of a goat. The Vatican's final ruling? The chants were accidentally divine. The abbey kept the music but added a disclaimer. Warning, may cause unplanned devotion. As you leave, Theodoric slips you a parchment. For your travels. It's Pan's lullaby for the liturgically weary, annotated with doodles of snoozing demons. Somewhere, Faunus grumbles about royalties. Florence in 1482 is a kaleidoscope of marble dust, egg tempera, and egos the size of Brunelleschi's dome. You're dodging apprentices hauling pig bladders of vermilion pigment as Sandro Botticelli, the man who put the Renaissance in Drama Queen, paces his studio. His latest commission? A Birth of Venus knockoff titled Venus hosting a garden party for minor deities. Minor deities, he mutters. So, Pan. Ugh. Mainstream fact interlude. Renaissance artists loved repackaging myths, but only the aesthetic bits. Nymphs. Gorgeous. Satyrs. Quirky decor. Actual goat-legged gods? Problematic. Botticelli's sketch of Pan, posed like a Hellenic boy band member, is missing one key detail, his flute. Who needs it? He snaps. Flutes are for peasants. This is art. Quirky twist. Pan, now moonlighting as the patron saint of petty grudges, isn't having it. He hijacks a pigeon, perches it on Botticelli's windowsill, and squawks, "Where's my flute, Sandro?" The artist, assuming it's a bad prank by rival Leonardo, lobs a loaf of stale focaccia. The pigeon dodges, poops on Venus's shell, and departs. Scholars still argue whether Botticelli's omission was intentional shade or an honest mistake. A recently discovered margin note in his sketchbook reads, "Flute? Flute. Flute. No. Distracts from thigh definition." Art historians are split. 52% say it's a critique of Pan's lowbrow music, 48% think he just forgot. You're sketching cherubs, poorly, when Botticelli's assistant, Luca, gasps. Maestro! The Pan figure, it's weeping. The canvas, still wet, sports a single azure tear rolling down Pan's cheek. Botticelli blames humidity. Luca blames divine intervention. You blame the pigeon, now eyeing the studio from a rooftop like a feathery mob boss. Pan's revenge escalates. That night, every flute in Florence goes missing. Street musicians wake to find lutes in their beds, smugly intact. A Medici heir's ceremonial fife vanishes mid-parade, replaced by a note, restoring dignity. P. The city buzzes with rumors. Is it the French? The plague? A really dedicated music critic? Botticelli, ever the pragmatist, adds a lyre to Pan's hands instead. There. Now he's Apollo's cousin. The studio collectively cringes. Here's the kicker. The painting becomes a hit. Patrons praise Pan's introspective silence and lyrical absence of that annoying flute. One critic writes, "Finally, a Pan who doesn't assault our ears." 5 stars. Botticelli, emboldened, starts a series. Ares without weapons, Hermes without sandals, Zeus without poor life choices. The Vatican orders 3. Pan, meanwhile, sulks in the Arno River, hijacking gondolier songs into droning lullabies. Gondoliers, initially furious, realize tourists tip more when they're half asleep. As you leave the studio, Botticelli tosses you a sketch. For your trouble. It's Pan, fluteless, juggling olives. The artist smirks. Tell him I'll add it back, in the sequel. The pigeon caws. You swear it mutters. Foreshadowing. London's Belgravia district smells of lavender, laudanum, and repressed emotions. You're seated in Dr. Alastair Witherspoon's hysterical wellness emporium, where fainting couches outnumber patients 3-1. A woman in a corset so tight, her ribs audibly creak, whispers, The doctor says my nerves are too inspired. Her companion nods, swooning into a vase of lilies. The air thrums with the clink of teacups and the hiss of steam-powered relaxation engines. Then, cutting through the chaos, Pan's flute. Mainstream fact time. Victorian medicine pathologized everything from reading novels to having opinions. Hysteria, Greek for wandering womb, was the catch-all diagnosis for women who dared to exist interestingly. Treatments ranged from leeches on the ankles to hysterical parfaits made of opium and regret. Dr. Witherspoon's innovation? Replaced the leeches with lullabies. Quirky twist. The good doctor discovered Pan's sheet music in a crate labeled Greek Curiosities at Portobello Market. Mistaking it for a medical treatise, thanks to a smudged label reading Panacea melodies, he hired a flautist to play them at half speed. Patients paid 10 shillings per session to nap under the influence of Arcadian respiratory normalizers. Spoiler: it worked. Scholars still argue whether Pan's music genuinely soothed nerves or if Victorian women just faked sleep to escape corset adjustments. A diary entry from 1891 reads, "Dr. Witherspoon's hysteria cure is divine. Finally, 2 hours where my husband can't ask me to fetch his pipe." You recline on a chaise, mandatory for spinal alignment, as the flautist launches into Ode to the Sound of Not Being Perceived. The melody weaves through the room like a silk chemise, soft, smothering, effective. A society matron slides sideways, her bustle deflating like a soufflé of despair. Dr. Witherspoon beams. Observe. The music compels the womb to, cease its wanderings. Here's the kicker: the treatment's real success was accidental. Pan's flute didn't calm hysterics, it masked the sound of corset laces snapping. Women returned not for the cure, but for the naps. Soon, factories piped in Pan's tunes to keep seamstresses from fainting mid-stitch. Even Queen Victoria's staff played it during royal tantrums, dubbing it, "God Save the Snooze." But progress falters when a patient sleepwalks out the door, muttering, "I'll have the parfait without the regret." Dr. Witherspoon chases her, brandishing a stethoscope like a scepter. "Madam, your womb is still ambulatory." Pan, invisible in the gaslight haze, chuckles. "Finally, a century that gets me." The jazz age roars like a lion with a martini in its paw. You're wedged into a speakeasy behind a butcher shop, where the smell of gin mixes with raw meat in a way that'd make a vulture queasy. A flapper in a fringed dress shimmies past, her pearls clattering like teeth in winter. The trumpet wails, the sax moans, the crowd howls, and then, cutting through the din, a familiar drone. Pan's flute, piped through a gramophone hidden inside a stuffed alligator. Mainstream fact interlude: Prohibition turned America into a nation of insomniacs. Bootleg hooch fueled all-night parties, but mornings after were brutal. Hangover cures ranged from pickle juice to radioactive tonics that glowed in the dark. Enter Pan's music, repackaged as sonic sobriety, by a jazz pianist who'd studied Greco-Roman myths between gigs. The pitch. Drown the devil's trumpet with the god of naps. Quirky twist. Flappers, those icons of rebellion, became Pan's unexpected apostles. They'd stumble out of speakeasies at dawn, cloche hats askew, and flock to relaxation parlors where Pan's flute loops played over the sound of ice clinking in hair of the dog cocktails. One ad in the Chicago Tribune read, "Tired of feeling like Hades's doormat? Let Pan's melodies scrape you off the floor." Scholars still argue whether the trend was sincere or just another fad. A diary from a Long Island socialite snarks, played Pan's dreary tunes at Gertrude's sober-up soiree. 5 people slept, 2 proposed marriage, and the butler quit. Success. Meanwhile, jazz purists called it musical treason, but even Louis Armstrong allegedly kept a Pan record for "those mornings when the trumpet feels like a jackhammer to the soul." You collapse onto a velvet fainting couch, repurposed from the Victorian era, because irony, as the gramophone hisses out Ode to the Sound of Your Own Regret, jazz remix. A flapper named Mabel slumps beside you, raccoon-eyed and radiant. "This stuff's magic," she slurs. "I've been awake since 19, but this," she gestures to the alligator gramophone. "This is the cat's pajamas, the bee's knees, the goat's Whatever. Here's the kicker. The relaxation parlors were fronts for underground jazz clubs. Cops raiding them faced a dilemma: arrest everyone for prohibition violations, or admit they fell asleep mid-bust. A New York Times headline blared, "Police nap on the job." Inside, the pandemic sweeping the force. Pan himself materializes as a shadow on the wall, sipping gin from a teacup. "Modern mortals," he muses. "They'll swallow gasoline for fun, but need my music to survive it." He toasts the room to mediocrity, the ultimate rebellion. As dawn bleeds through blackout curtains, the flappers stagger out, revived enough to do it all again. Mabel tosses you a flask. "For the road. It's just tea." She winks. "Unless you wanna meet Pan properly." The gramophone skips. The alligator's glass eye falls out. Somewhere, Faunus whispers, "ET2, jazz age?" The 21st century hums with the static of a million screens. You're in a studio apartment where cozy means LED fairy lights and a mic shaped like a marshmallow. Zoe, a sleep influencer with a ponytail so tight it lifts her eyebrows, adjusts her ring light. "Tonight's soundscape, rainfall on a dinosaur's back," she whispers into the mic. Her Patreon-funded audience of insomniacs and over-caffeinated coders waits, headphones on, desperate for a sliver of stillness. Then Zoe's producer, a guy named Dex who smells of energy drinks and existential panic, slides her a USB drive labeled "Panic Button." "Found this in the ancient and boring deep cuts. It's aggressively dull." Mainstream fact interlude, ASMR, Autonomous Sensory Meridian Response, is the internet's answer to ancient lullabies. Whispered rambles, tapping, and crinkling paper replace lyres and flutes, all chasing that sweet, sweet brain tingle. But algorithms crave novelty, and Zoe's "Rainfall on a Dinosaur's Back" is underperforming. Enter Pan's flute loops, digitized from a vinyl record found in a charity bin labeled "Music TO File Taxes 2." Quirky twist: Pan's music is the algorithmic loophole no one saw coming. Its monotony triggers ASMR and bypasses copyright bots too bored to flag it. Zoe uploads a track titled 10-Hour Ancient Greek Yawn Symphony. It trends in 37 countries. Comments pour in, "This cured my tinnitus and my existential dread. I haven't slept this well since the Cretaceous period. Who's Pan, and why is he inside my skull?" Scholars still argue whether ASMR is the evolution of Pan's ancient magic or just proof humanity's been gaslit by capitalism into paying for naps. A TED Talk claims Pan was the proto-ASM artist, while a Reddit thread insists the tracks are a CIA plot to lower productivity. Zoe's studio becomes a digital temple to mediocrity. Subscribers beg for merch: I Red Heart Dullness hoodies, Pan's Flute Hour sleep masks, coffee mugs that read "This could be a nap." Dex rigs a green screen to project a CGI Pan, goat legs pixelated for copyright reasons, nodding off in a beanbag. Chat explodes. Daddy Pan sleeping face ZZZ, ASMR goat Godwin? Here's the kicker. Pan himself stumbles into the digital realm, hijacking a buffering live stream. "Mortals," he booms, then yawns. Whispers mortals. "Your views honor me. But where are the sheep? The drunk satyrs? The, whatever that guy with the donkey ears was called." Zoe, ever the pro, mutes her mic. "Dex. Why is the goat man from the green screen talking?" Pan, now crowd-surfing via emojis, goat musical notes ZZZ, sighs. "Fine. I'll do a collab. But I want royalties in figs." The stream peaks at 500K viewers. Someone donates $1,000 to hear Pan yawn the alphabet. A tech bro in Silicon Valley codes an app called Panify, mediocrity on demand. Investors throw money at it. But as dawn glows through Zoe's blackout curtains, the chat slows. Emojis drift like autumn leaves. Pan's pixelated form flickers. "Same as it ever was," he murmurs. "You chase sleep, I chase whatever this is. We're all just." The feed freezes, buffers, crashes. Zoe stares at the stream-ended screen. Dex. We're monetizing the crash next time. The world softens now, edges blurred like a watercolor left in the rain. You're floating, maybe, or sinking, but gently, as if the air itself has become a hammock woven from half-remembered dreams. Pan's flute loops linger, not as sound, but as the memory of sound, a fingerprint on the spine of your thoughts. Centuries unravel here, Midas's ears wilt into dandelion fluff, Spartan snores dissolve into summer crickets, Victorian corsets loosen into breath. The algorithm's buzz fades to a hum, then a whisper, then the space between whispers. Scholars will debate, poets will fret, but the truth is simple as a shepherd's yawn: sleep isn't a conquest. Not a ritual, a trend, a rebellion. It's the oldest pact between mortals and the wild, a surrender to the quiet that was here before lyres, before flutes, before the first fire stole the night's dominion. Pan's final note hangs, a question mark without a question. You could chase it, parse it, cling to its tail like a child chasing smoke. Or you could let it go, as leaves let go of trees, as stones let go of echoes, as the world lets go of today to make room for tomorrow. The stars, those ancient insomniacs, blink once, twice. The moon tucks a cloud behind its ear. Somewhere, a river forgets its own name and hums instead. Breathe in. Breathe out. Let the silence be the last word. Sweet dreams.